Hi there. Hello, YouTube.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our latest Dale event. That's the Digital Archives Learning Exchange. I'm Hannah Jones. I'm Sector Development Manager for the East of England and the Arts area of focus at the National Archives. And I'll be... Sorry, go on.
We're very seamless here. I'm Joe Pugh. I'm Digital Development Manager at the National Archives. I'm wishing we'd scheduled this after the barbers had reopened, but other than that, very, very happy to be here. On you go, Hannah, sorry.
No, that's about all I was going to say. So welcome along to everyone who's joining us this afternoon. We've got a really good number of people booked this afternoon, so hoping you find the event useful and enjoyable. So we've got 3 guest speakers this afternoon. We're going to be focusing on digital preservation in practice, looking at some of the tools and resources that services can use to develop their digital preservation projects and offers. So coming up in a bit, we're going to have Rosie Vizor from the Garden Museum in London, who's going to be talking about embedding digital preservation practices at the museum. Later on, we're also going to have our colleague David Underdown from the National Archives, who's going to be giving us a live demonstration of the new diagram model, which is to look at digital preservation risk modelling, which is going to be, we hope, really useful for services to be able to demonstrate why they need to sort of implement digital preservation within their workplaces. And finally, this afternoon, we've got Professor Stephanie Decker from the University of Bristol, who's going to be talking about use and access of email archives and maybe getting some thoughts going on when you're making digital content available in future, some of the considerations that you might need to bear in mind. So that's the plan for this afternoon. If you're watching on YouTube, you can post questions in the chat section. We'll be feeding questions back to each of our speakers after their presentations. So do feel free to post questions. We'll try and deal with those as we go through. We're also going to be live tweeting this afternoon, so you can follow along using the hashtag Dale_ideas. So that's the plan for this afternoon. There we go. Thank you, Joe. Just put the hashtag up. But first of all, this afternoon, Joe's going to be giving us a quick update on the latest developments in the plugged-in, powered-up strategy run by the National Archives. So over to Joe.
Thanks very much, Hannah. I mean, there's only I'm only going to speak very, very briefly, and there's only one thing that I really want to. I feel obliged to put the plugged-in, powered-up link up for anybody who wants to see what we've been up to, what we're going to be up to. But the main thing that I want to talk about is a new bit of novice to know-how. So we have commissioned from the DPC a set of modules around access. So, you know, after all, the idea of collecting all this stuff and hanging on to it for a long period of time is hopefully that we can show it to somebody. So if we're thinking about how, thinking about our users, thinking about the kinds of access we want, these are some questions I hope Stephanie will be giving us some insight into later in the session. These modules are designed to take us through some of the kind of the fundamentals around access. And those modules are open for pre-booking right now. So there are a bunch of slots available online. Feel free to follow the link and try and snaffle yourself an early place when that course launches in the next few weeks. There's probably a date on there. We are intending to have a launch event for the modules in the first week of May, but the content might even be up in advance of that. So book yourself a slot and you can be some of the first attendees of this program. And that's all I want to say. I mean, I really want to hear from our lovely speakers this week, but I think that's the most important kind of breaking thing for plugged in, powered up just at the moment.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Just to say, Novice to Know-How has been hugely popular so far. I think the latest stats we've had from our colleagues at the DPC, it's been over 1,500 people have gone through Novice to Know-How since we launched it last year, which is absolutely fantastic stats.
From 56 countries, I'm told. So they showed us a map, and it did look very. I was a bit like, if we can get someone in Greenland, you know, then this will look really, really terrific. But yeah, there's a good spread. It's exciting.
Excellent. That's really good. Okay, I don't think we've had any questions in response to that, but yeah, if you do have any questions about Plugged In, Powered Up, the strategy generally, then do feel free to post those.
Yeah, I'm around for the rest. You won't see a lot of me in this session, fortunately, but I'm around. So if anybody's got any questions for me, do pop them in, and I'll happily take them at the end.
Yeah, Joe's going to be doing all the techie bits behind the scenes. I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with me doing all the talky bits. Sorry about that. So let's move on to our next speaker this afternoon. So I'm really pleased to introduce Rosie Vizor from the Garden Museum in London. Rosie was one of the participants in one of the strands of last year's Plugged In, Powered Up strategy, and that was the digital peer mentoring programme. So Rosie has now been through the peer mentoring and has been able to use the skills that she learned from that to actually start embedding digital preservation processes at the Garden Museum. So she's going to be talking us through that. So Rosie, over to you.
Thank you. Just sorting out sharing my screen for you. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Right, so hello, my name's Rosie Vizor and I'm the archivist at the Garden Museum in London. And today I'm going to be sharing my experiences of moving from using digital preservation training and guidance to actually putting things in place at the Garden Museum. Some people may struggle a bit in taking that initial step, especially in a small institution where they might be the only person working on this. So I hope that by sharing my experiences and reflecting on the process of what went well, that I can give others confidence in their own abilities to get started. So just to give you a bit of background to my situation, I'm very much a beginner in digital preservation. I qualified in archives and records management in 2018, and since then have taken part in some additional training programs, but I am a lone archivist in a small institution, so I juggle digital preservation alongside my other tasks, like many other people. The Garden Museum is a museum in Lambeth that explores and celebrates British gardens and gardening through its collection, archive, exhibitions, events, and garden. It's a relatively small museum with a staff of about 20 people and is an independent charity with no core public funding or endowment. The museum is housed in the deconsecrated Church of St Mary's at Lambeth, right next to Lambeth Palace, which is where I am today. The Archive of Garden Design, which is at the heart of the building and the museum's mission, has a collecting focus on the working records of 20th and 21st century leading garden designers, together with garden photographers and writers. The archive itself is relatively young, and I am the first full-time archivist. Although there were some aspects of digital preservation that I inherited, I was really starting many aspects from the beginning. Within this organisational context, I needed to keep costs low and keep processes fairly simple so that I could manage them on my own. Over the last few years, the number of digital assets we're creating has been increasing at a rapid rate. We had a digital trainee who produced thousands of digital surrogates during her time with us. With the onset of lockdown, we've had to increase our digital output in order to reach our audiences, resulting in an ever-growing number of films and recorded talks. We also anticipate that more of our future archive deposits will arrive as born digital records, reflecting the move towards digital working practices in the landscape design industry. In light of this, and as a new professional working as a lone archivist, I applied for the Plugged In, Powered Up peer mentoring programme with the aim of gaining support in establishing a digital preservation workflow and strategy. I was also hoping to gain some reassurance on our chosen storage solutions. I was lucky to get a place on the mentoring scheme last year and was paired with one of the National Archives digital archivists, Fran McKenzie. The programme ran for 8 months from March to October, and Fran and I met online once or twice a month. Before each meeting, I would write down what I had achieved since the last meeting, any questions I had, and we'd decide actions that I would try to complete by the next meeting. Fran shared advice, useful resources, and taught me how to use certain tools, but she couldn't really tell me what to do. The mentoring scheme was really beneficial for me, not just because of Fran's expert advice, but also because it forced me to set aside time each week for digital preservation, which kept me focused. Making notes and talking them through at our meetings helped me to keep track of my progress and celebrate the small wins so I didn't feel overwhelmed. Although digital preservation work has no end point, it was also good to have an ultimate deadline when the scheme would end, with key goals and smaller targets every 2 weeks. I would encourage others to apply for the mentoring scheme, but you could also think about setting one up yourself, or even finding a buddy in another organisation who's also keen to get started. Just having someone to bounce ideas off was really helpful, especially if, like me, you're a lone archivist or someone with sole responsibility for this work in your organisation. So that's a bit of background. And now I thought I'd share with you what I actually did during the project and what I'm working on now that it's finished. Obviously, everyone's organisational needs will be different, so this won't be the perfect way, nor will it be the only way to do things. But I hope it's helpful to show you how you could take those first steps at moving from training and guidance to digital preservation in action. So a good place to start, I found, is to see where you are now and where you want to be in the future with a quick benchmarking exercise. And for this, I used the National Digital Stewardship Alliance's levels of digital preservation. At the end of my mentoring project, I looked at this again to see how far I'd come. You'll probably be at different levels for different aspects of digital preservation, but there's always room for improvement. And you can do something similar for your own continuing professional development in terms of your digital skills. This was my before and after timescale. And you can see that digital preservation was the area I felt least confident in at the beginning, so that was the focus of my mentoring project. But my skills also improved in other areas during the project, as my work took me in different directions and I was learning along the way. No matter where you're starting at, you should feel proud of any improvements that you make. So after I'd done the benchmarking exercise, Fran and I felt that I needed to get a better grip of what digital assets my organisation was actually dealing with. And to do this, I created a digital asset register. Your organisation might already have one of these, and if so, that's great. And this would be a good time to look at it and see if it needs updating or improving. If you're starting from scratch like I was, you could use and adapt the National Archives template. The Digital Preservation Coalition also has some really useful guidance, which will tell you what information you need to include and why it's useful. One of my tips would be to break things down into sections. So start small, grow your confidence, and then expand. I started at a high level, thinking in terms of the entire organisation and the types of digital records we hold and how they could be grouped. I then moved on to the more granular work of listing, but focused on just the archive to start with, as this was my key area of responsibility. And I now keep this register up to date. So once you've got your digital asset register, you should have a better idea of the whole picture, what you're dealing with, how much content you have, what file formats it covers, and the associated risks. You can then start thinking about how this data will be used and accessed, and you can factor that into your plans. So the next thing I did was to read the National Archives digital preservation workflow. I started going through each of the steps one by one and applying them to one of the museum's born digital archives as a kind of test run to see how this would work in practice. At each stage, I adapted the guidance to create my own workflow, which suited the museum's needs. This became my procedure document that I can now refer back to. This worked quite well for me because I had an exemplary steps to work through systematically. I inevitably had to ask Fran questions as things came up and supplement my knowledge by doing additional research and training. This was all part of the learning process. This is also where the novice to know-how training really came in handy. And I'll revisit my procedure document later down the line to see if I can add any more of the optional steps from TNA's workflow to improve things. But at the moment, I've kept it quite simple. So now I just thought I'd share with you what I actually needed to do at each stage of the workflow and the documents I had to create, the tools I had to learn how to use, and any lessons learned along the way. The process was obviously vary for different organisations, but I hope this gives you a sense of what moving from guidance to action might actually involve. So the first stage is select and transfer. And some of the things that I needed to do at this stage were to update our digital preservation policy, add to our accessions procedures by creating a list of preferred file formats for born digital deposits, establish a file structure, speak to IT about virus scanning, and learn how to use Droid. And for those of you who don't know what Droid is, Droid stands for Digital Record Object Identification. It's a free software tool developed by the National Archives that will help you to automatically profile a wide range of file formats. For example, it will tell you what versions you have, their age and size, and when they were last changed. It can also provide you with data to help you find duplicates. And there are guidelines for how to use Droid available online. So at the second stage, which is ingest, I needed to learn about file formats, and I boosted my knowledge on this through the Novice to Know-How training, run checksums, learn handy functions on Excel, courtesy of Fran, and write procedures along the way. I would say that this last point is one of my lessons learned. So writing up procedure documents along the way helped to embed the knowledge and also to ensure that when I came to do this again in the future, I could refer back to the procedure documents. And they would also be there in the future for my potential successor or any other members of staff. So the third stage of the workflow is preserve, which was a key stage for me. At this point, I needed to learn how to use Google Cloud Console, as this had recently been set up at the museum but hadn't actually been used yet. You'll need to decide what storage solutions are best for your organisation, of course. I also needed to establish a workflow for storage, which I presented in a visual format, and I wrote accompanying procedures. Write up a rationale to explain my decisions, and I'd say that this is another useful lesson learned. It should help at future review points or when future archivists do that detective work to find out why we did what we did. Technology evolves and situations change, so by explaining your decisions at the time, you can help others understand the reasons behind your thinking in the future. At this stage, I also put dates in the calendar for future integrity checks and storage reviews in 3 years, and I created an integrity checks log. And finally, I needed to write up an archive access security list. So the mentoring program kind of ended for me after the preservation stage, in line with my initial goals to establish a digital preservation workflow and strategy. But I was really lucky that Fran very generously offered to continue the mentoring relationship after the project with TNA ended. We wrote up some goals for the next part of the workflow, which was access. And for me, this was going to be the fun bit. And my goals at this point were to write new procedures and agreements for the provision of digital access during lockdown, which I've now done and have been using. And what I'm working on now is preparing the catalogue records and ensuring that all the sort of paperwork is in place to make the catalogue available online through Collections Index Plus. I'm also reviewing and updating our website to improve access to the collections. And we've started work on a Russell Page Archive learning resource and Instagram page, if you'd like to check those out. I'm also collaborating with our learning department on digital resources. And I'm very keen for the next portion of training on access, as this works really well for me, timing-wise. So when the mentoring scheme was coming to an end, Fran and I reflected on the processes and set goals for wrapping up the project. I think it was important to step back and evaluate what we'd done and congratulate ourselves on what we'd achieved, especially as at the time I was working from home and being a department of one, I hadn't really had the chance to share what I was doing with my colleagues. So at this point, my goals were to look back at the benchmarks and see how far I'd come, write a report, the Digital Preservation Mentoring Project, and share this with relevant departments and offer them training, advocate for digital preservation in the organisation and beyond, and to keep going. So to end my part of the presentation, by sharing my experiences of starting pretty much from scratch with digital preservation as a new professional working as a lone archivist in a small and relatively young archive within a museum setting that's an independent charity with a limited budget, I hope to have given others confidence and ideas for making some initial strides with digital preservation in their own organisations. My parting thoughts would be to start small. It can feel intimidating making the shift from reading guidance to actually implementing those steps, but go easy on yourself. You've got to start somewhere, and anything you do is going to be better than nothing. Find yourself a buddy if you can, and take the journey with them, sharing advice and resources. Sometimes it can feel intimidating sharing what you've done with a large group of people. So sharing with just one other person is a good compromise at the beginning. You could always set up a small cross-organisational working group and share resources once you're feeling a bit more confident and have a few things in place. It's also good to set dates for those meetings and actions to achieve before each one, and also try to set aside dedicated time each week to work on digital preservation. It can be very easy to get swamped with other things, so having someone to report back to gives you a bit of a nudge and also some kind of accountability. I think it's also good to have an end goal in sight for your project, and then you can always set another one when you've achieved that. And on that note, celebrate the small wins, as this can help prevent you from feeling overwhelmed. So that's all I've got to say for now, but I'm very happy for anyone to get in touch with me through email if you'd like to talk more about taking those first steps from moving from guidance and training to digital preservation in action. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rosie. That is an awful lot to have achieved single-handed.
I wasn't quite single-handedly. I did the amazing Fran.
No, that's really impressive and a really excellent example of demonstrating how you can use a program like the digital peer mentoring program to actually sort of set those steps in motion and just make a start. So we've got a few minutes for questions. What I wanted to ask about first of all was, you do seem to have achieved quite a lot in a relatively short time, you know. Did you specifically set aside of time every week to do digital preservation, and how did you sort of balance that with your regular tasks, you know, that you have to do as the day job? How easy was that?
Well, I was working from home at the time. This was kind of in deep lockdown mode. So in all honesty, I think that helped because I didn't have so much of the day-to-day firefighting that sometimes comes with being a lone archivist. But I did try to timetable in literally on my calendar time for digital preservation. And I think that was good because, yeah, it can be very easy to get swamped with other things. And as I said in the presentation, having sort of set targets that I was supposed to be achieving and then reporting back to Fran, who I obviously wanted to please, was quite helpful there.
Excellent, that's really good. We've also had a question in from Sarah, who wanted to ask about how you went about doing your integrity checking for the digital storage.
I used Droid, and there's, I think, guidance online for that. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to go through all the steps of how to do it on here. But yeah, there's lots of guidance online. And then I made a log, which I'll keep updating when it's time to do it again.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you'd included you'd scheduled it into your calendar, didn't you, that you're going to be doing periodic checks? Yeah.
I'm a big fan of scheduling things in the calendar because otherwise you will just forget.
Excellent. The other thing I really liked from your presentation was you mentioned that you used the digital preservation workflow documents that were online, but then adapted them for your own uses. And I think that's a really valuable thing to point out to people who are watching today, is that you can use that documentation. Actually, can we get, Joe, if you're watching, can we get you to put the link up to the plugged in powered up pages again, so that people can link to those? There's some thank you, Joe. There's some fantastic resources on there, so do take a look at those. The documentation we're talking about is the digital preservation workflow documents, and they're there either as individual steps, so ingest, etc., etc., or they're there as a whole document that you can download that talks you through the entire workflow process. There's also some links in there to open access resources that you can use and try out for different steps of the process. So do make use of those, because that's what they're there for. And a thank you from Sarah. She was just trying to find out what tool you'd used. So Droid, yeah, thank you. If anybody else has got any questions, please feel free to post them now. I will just try and fill for another minute or so while we see any other questions come in. The other thing I was going to ask about was, were there any sort of priorities that you felt were sort of higher risk collections that you needed to look at first, or that you thought would be good examples to kind of use as a test bed to develop the processes within the museum?
Well, at the moment, we really don't have very many born digital deposits.
Okay.
So I actually went through the process with all of them because we had so few. I then did it again with my digital surrogates. And I'm currently in the process of sort of expanding out to my colleagues on how we can do the same thing for things like our public programs, films and recordings that we obviously want to preserve as well when they become part of the archive. So it was quite obvious for me where to start.
Okay, that's really useful, thank you. We've got a couple of people sort of posting thanks. You've got a round of applause, and somebody else saying that really interesting to hear about putting the theory into practice, and it makes the whole process seem a little less daunting, which is fantastic to hear. That's really good. But yeah, excellent. As Rosie said, she's really happy to take further questions. I think she's going to be hanging around for the rest of the event as well, so if you do have any extra questions. Oh, we've just had a couple more come through. Do you have any tips for advocating for digital preservation within your organisation?
I think I actually had some more TNA guidance sent to me on advocating, so you could look there as well.
Yeah.
For me, I'm in a really small organisation where we all know each other quite well. So apart from obviously speaking up and trying to make people aware of what I was doing, we also do sort of departmental presentations to all staff. I don't know if that'd be appropriate in all organisations, but that's another opportunity to share what you've been doing and try and make people see that it's valuable and applicable to them as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there's again, on the plugged in powered up pages, there's some links to advocating for digital preservation within your organisation that you can go to. There's also some really good resources on the Digital Preservation Coalition's pages. They've got some really good guides to writing a business case for digital preservation and things like that. So those can be really useful as well. So fantastic. Lots of people saying it really makes your presentation makes it seem more doable, which is great to hear. So really good to hear. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Rosie. That was really great to hear. As we said, I think Rosie's going to be hanging around for the rest of the afternoon. So if you do have any questions a little bit later on in the programme that you suddenly thought, oh, I've meant to ask her this, do feel free to add those. But Rosie, we'll let you go. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to our second presentation. Okay. So our second speaker this afternoon is my colleague David Underdown from the National Archives. David's going to be talking about Diagram, which is a new model that's been developed by the National Archives in conjunction with the University of Warwick. David's going to be giving us a live demonstration of Diagram this afternoon, talking through how the product was developed and how services can utilise it to demonstrate some of the risks behind digital preservation and to advocate for improved digital preservation processes. So David, over to you.
Afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can see the website up there. I will try and go through, as Hannah has just said, and following on nicely from what Rosie was saying, we hope in part this can be an advocacy tool, and will also help you kind of prioritize where to start. You know, if you're in that position of going, oh my lord, you know, where do I start with this? You can work out what will be the kind of highest priority activities and areas to work on by using this tool. So I will kind of dive in, give a brief intro. I'm not sure whether you'll see the URL there at the top. Maybe Joe can put that up. So the homepage has a brief intro. You will find essentially to use it, you have to go through a set of questions relating to your kind of current position, and then later on you can do some scenario modelling and adjust the answers you gave to those questions to try and investigate where you might like to be in future. So you can download the set of questions as a PDF, because we appreciate often you'll need to talk to other people, to your IT and things like that. Bit of information about who and why to use it, how to use it, and the team behind it. The kind of real guts of it is this kind of graph of how different factors affect each other, and behind that, behind the scenes, there's a whole load of probabilities and statistics that we gathered throughout the course of developing it. So you can see, and we're looking ultimately at how likely it is you'll be able to render digital material in future, and how likely it is you've got kind of full intellectual control over that. So it was developed by us at the National Archives, the Applied Statistics and Risk Unit at the University of Warwick, and we had several archives partners involved as well. Oh, seem to have just lost connection there somehow. We didn't anticipate that lots of people would be using this at once. So if lots of you start diving on this right now, it may overwhelm the server, which I didn't think about in advance. So there's some information on the National Archives website about the full project team, and we had backing from, as it's given at the bottom, from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and Warwick had a postdoc supported by money from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. So there is further information on how to use the tool on the second tab down. All those things, all those tab names and various other concepts are all fully defined in the glossary here, and in various other parts, which I'll mention as we go on. We've tried to draw on existing resources and definitions. So we will normally say where these definitions come from, things like the DPC handbook we've used. So hopefully we're not going out on a limb and doing anything different to what people will expect. There is also Learn About Diagram tab. So again, we've got the diagram, the graph showing how these things all work together, and a bit of explanation about the maths behind it, and a paper on, we used a process called expert elicitation to get some of those probabilities where there's not kind of hard data so readily available. So there's a link to a paper by the folks at Warwick there. We will also have a paper coming in the next issue of the Archives and Records Journal, looking at some of the process of the project development and a bit of how it works as well. So also built in to help you understand what the results mean when you have them. It'll just take a moment to load up. We have two what we call reference models. So at this kind of low end, we've got an organization that's just backing things up. So we can see maybe you'll have a reasonable chance of on being able to open a file in future, but you tend not to have that much intellectual control. You don't know much about the individual files. You don't have the characterization information about the file formats and things like that. And then at the more upper end, we have something representing an established national archive where you've got a much better chance of renderability, and particularly, you know, the intellectual control has gone way up. You've got all the metadata, whether that's technical metadata or descriptive metadata, you know, your kind of restrictions on use and any copyright information and things like that as well. So at that point, I will show you how you basically start. So click on create a model. Oh, sorry, you get a little warning to say it will kind of time out after 15 minutes or so. So if you haven't gone through and saved, you may lose things. But if I call it something sensible like Dale demo, we'll start to move into the questions. So the first question is just about the proportions of material you've got, whether they're born digital, which should be fairly self-explanatory, digitized, so this is records that were originally paper, have been converted to digital, and it is now the digital thing you're creating, as opposed to a surrogate where you still have the paper original. So for this demo, I'm going to put these up to 25% born digital. You can either adjust the sliders, or you can use the arrows there, or type in the box, or whatever. And you should see that the everything has to add up to 100%, but it will try and do that automatically as you go through. As you move things, it will adjust accordingly, and that's the same for all the things that are set with this kind of setup. Then on to information about how you're storing things at the moment. So A is less stable storage. So that's particularly things like CDRs, floppy disks, USB flash drives. More stable, you're talking, you know, proper network storage, backup tapes and things like that. And then outsourced data storage is, you know, cloud storage essentially. So I'm going to leave everything on 100% storage, where we're our final storage. Now this is what, replication refreshment. This is about making sure you regularly move things on and keep storage fresh. It's not quite so important where we've already selected that 100% for outsourced storage, because we're making the assumption that, you know, whoever you've done that, so Google or Amazon or whoever, you know, they're looking after keeping that storage infrastructure going. But we'll also assume that maybe there's a few things where we haven't actually moved. We haven't fully pulled them off, so we don't off original media. So some things might need a bit of that looking at. And again, this replication refreshment, this second question is about making sure you've always got at least 2 copies. Again, we assume a bit for the cloud storage, then in fact that they're looking after that. So I will leave that. Now what we call operating environment. So this is about making sure one of those copies is actually somewhere else. So if your primary location gets wiped out, then you can reinstate from the copy. So for this, again, it's slightly moot in terms of how the model works, because we're already assuming you're using cloud storage. And then again, if you have, this is about, if you have kept all your eggs in one basket as you were, is there protection against things like flood? But if you are keeping stuff offsite or in the cloud, then you can choose the not applicable. Physical disaster. So this is in the current version of the model, it's only considering flood risk. We will be looking in the future at how we incorporate a wider range of risks here, but we felt this was probably one of the most likely scenarios where a physical issue could still affect your digital materials in the UK. So we went with just that to start with. I'm going to leave that at very low for now. Now, checksums. So yes means you actually have created the checksums before transfer to you, which means you've got an audit trail right back. You can prove in the future that what you received was exactly what the donor had at the time they handed stuff over to you. Otherwise, you can choose archivist generated. So you've generated a checksum as soon as at least it's come into your custody. But that actual transfer process can be one of the most kind of likely points at which files get corrupted. If you're if you're transferring it over the internet, or if you're copying it onto a hard drive and then back off a removable hard drive at your archive, there's several chances for things to get damaged. So you don't quite have that full trail back to the donor's holding of it. So for this, I'm going to assume actually we maybe haven't really done anything. We've got a few files over time, but we haven't really done anything with them. So we haven't created any checksums at all yet. Now on to some of the questions where you're more likely to have to talk to perhaps IT people around things. So system security. At the top end, ISO 27001 is the kind of heavyweight IT security standard. And then obviously, if you're not aware of any accreditation down the bottom, and then we have Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, which are two UK government-backed schemes. Cyber Essentials is essentially a self-assessment. And then Cyber Essentials Plus, then there is actually checking of that by a third party after you've done the assessment. So I'm going to, for this scenario, I'm going to assume we're in an organisation that has the basic Cyber Essentials. And then this is asking about penetration testing. So if you've done the full ISO 27001, you'll probably have some sort of penetration testing, or your organisation may have done something about this, but this is again where you're likely to have to ask around to find out an answer. For this demo, I'm going to choose no test. And now we're on to some of the questions where you will need to have done a bit of an assessment against the NDSA levels of preservation that Rosie mentioned. So first of all, it asks you, it is a live link out to the level. So if you need a reminder, you can just click on the link. I'd recommend opening it in a new tab, and then just get a reminder. And for this, as I was saying earlier, I'm kind of imagining that there might be some material still on its original media that hasn't been kind of stabilized. So I'm going to choose not achieved. And then, but we have virus checked everything, so we'll leave that as yes. Then on to information management. So again, we're looking at something based on the NDSA levels of preservation, this time what it calls the metadata functional area. So for this, we have done some work, we've got some metadata, so we'll choose level 1. And similarly on the content functional area, I'm going to choose within NDSA, I'm going to choose level 1. Now moving to look at one of the other kind of existing tools, DPC's RAM, that's the Rapid Assessment Model and Digital Preservation Coalition. So it's a similar sort of thing, giving you a way of assessing where you currently are and thinking about where you want to move in the future. So for these ones, the content preservation area, capability I, and capability J, the metadata management within that, I'm going to set them both at awareness. which is kind of fairly equivalent to level 1 in NDSA quite often. And now some questions about the technical skills that are available to you. Again, we've used an existing framework, the DigCurve curriculum framework, that's set out to kind of standardize all the different skills that people need in digital archives. So again, there's a live link, and it's got the reference number for each skill and the name of the skill. So for here, I'm going to assume that on the digital preservation standards, you've got some basic knowledge, and on understanding the kind of basics of file types, applications, and systems, there's some basic knowledge, but everything else, the more kind of advanced skills, you've got nothing. And that's the last question. That gives you the overview. So we've got 18 on intellectual control and 44. And if we want to see that in the context of those two reference models, it now loads that up. So we can see that even, with fairly basic answers, we're doing better than just backing up. We've done a bit of work on our metadata, so our intellectual control is better, and our renderability is better than that basic thing. We've done a little bit of work on getting some information on file formats and things like that. In the screen, you can get a reminder of how you answered by clicking Show Answers. Hopefully that's still within the same tab, so you should be able to see that. So you can just go through, remind yourself of how you filled each one in, and work your way through. You can do that actually on the reference models as well. So if you want to see the assumptions in detail that we were making, you can use that Show Answers to see how we set those up in the first place. So that's kind of all very well, and maybe that shows that there's kind of an issue and you need to move on. So it's a start in advocating, but really you want to build some sort of business plan, show some of those hopefully fairly straightforward steps that you can do to start making a difference, as Rosie was describing, and have. But if you're not in such a small and friendly organisation as she is, you might need something a bit more robust. I mean, we used this kind of modelling ourselves in the recent UK government spending review, and TNA had a pretty good outcome from that, in part because we could put this sort of thing together to show that we now needed to renew our storage infrastructure and things like that. We had, from this model, we had much harder evidence than we'd ever been able to kind of give to Treasury before, and it seemed to work pretty well. So the next thing to do is use the create a scenario. You need to just click on it to select. You could create multiple models, so you just need to let it know which one you're interested in. Click next. Missed. Sorry, it just seems to have a slight glitch. The perils of live. Let's go back. Oh, there we go. So this should have come up straight away. So it may be you only want to concentrate on one or two areas initially. So you can choose those broad areas that you want to investigate, or of course you can click and select them all if you want to do bits from all of them. I am going to choose just a couple. So if we imagine we just want to work on improving the system security and our information management to start with. I can now, if I click create scenario, again, give it a name. So improved information. I'll show you at the end, there are sort of reports and things you can get out of this. So making these names intelligible is quite a good idea. It'll make those easier to share with people. So as I say, it just skips through to the relevant areas you've done, rather than asking you all the questions again, and it's remembered kind of what you answered previously. So we're going to imagine that we managed to move up and have that initial review, get onto Cyber Essentials Plus. And we'll get a penetration test, and we might be able to deal with, if it comes up with any real critical issues, we'll manage that, but we'll expect the severe issues maybe to take a bit longer. And before we were on not achieved for NDSA at all, but we will try and move the areas of that, which is all about having at least documentation and audit of who can access the areas where you're storing your digital materials. Move that up to level 2, and we already had the virus checking, so we'll leave that. Information management, we will try and basically bump these up by 1 level each. Come on. Again, I should have said, yeah, you can go straight back to create another here, or the what next will kind of guide you through a bit as to what the various things you can do are. Or we'll just go back to view results, and now that one comes up as well, and you'll see it's kind of associated with my original model. So those changes make, on the intellectual control side, quite a bit of difference. We bumped up from 18 to 37, not made any difference on renderability though. So we might be wanting to think about how we could improve that as well. So if we create another scenario, come on, and it reloads, and now we can choose either to go back just to our original model, or we can actually build it on top of the changes we initially suggested. I'm going to go back to the original one. And this time we will concentrate on the idea of improving the technical skills of our staff. So this might be doing, novice to ninja and things like that. We've been really getting backing for doing training in these areas for archivists. So again, I'm going to take a fairly simplistic approach and just say we're going to be able to bump all the levels up by 1 from what they were. And this time we were just doing that area, so it was just that one. And again, we'll go back to view results, and it will just reload. So this time we see no change in intellectual control and a small change in renderability. Probably, if we bump those up by more significantly, we would see a greater increase there. So once you've done whatever modeling you're interested in, you can go to the download a report screen. It'll again give you that brief overview, and you can remind yourself again of the answers. Those are all, it's a little bit difficult to see, I'll admit, but those are all actually come up as selected this time. So if you deselect something, it then wouldn't appear in the reports. So you've got a few options. You can download a PDF, which is quite a reasonable kind of presentation look at what you've done, which is quite potentially quite a useful form just to share with management and stakeholders as to what you're doing in a reasonably nice format. You can download a CSV, so that'll give you more raw data in terms of these and show the answers again. It gives you more chance of kind of creating your own graphs and so on, if that's what you would rather do. And the final one, you can choose to download the app data, so that downloads something called a .rds file. This is all built in the R programming language, so that's just a kind of common save format for R that you can then use the upload a previous model. So if you want to, get a certain way through, you can use that save, upload the previous model, and come back and start doing more scenario modeling based on that. And that is basically all. I can, if anyone really wants, I can demonstrate those reports, or if people have got questions, we can go to that. It's hopefully just seen it. It's just downloaded as a PDF. If I open it, because I'm just sharing this tab, it won't show immediately, but I can go in and share that if people want to see it.
Great, thank you very much, David. I think everyone will agree that's a really useful tool, although it's, it is quite detailed and there are some sort of, some extra steps that you're going to need to undertake. That's a really valuable development in being able to demonstrate why services need to implement good digital preservation within their organisation.
Yeah, I should have said also we're hoping to kind of prepare a few case studies, probably potentially something based on what we did for the spending review, and a couple of other archives have started using it. So hopefully we'll be able to share some of those as well to help people understand how best to do the modelling. And there are email contacts at the bottom of the tool, so we will try and help you out if you're seeking to use it.
And there were 5 or 6 services that were involved in the development of Diagram as well, weren't there? So yeah, there were sort of examples coming in from archive services as the product was developed. Now that David's finished the live demo, I'm just posting the link to it in the YouTube chat so that people can go and have a play. As David said, if there's any questions anyone would like to post, then please let us know. As you said, there's quite a lot of information that needs to be gathered sort of potentially from other bits of the organisation. So in a way, you could almost use the need to be able to fill the fields in Diagram in as a way of sort of advocating for better information sharing across the organisation. If you're actually
I think one of the services that was originally involved did find that a bit when they were starting to do that. It's like go, well, yeah, who do I talk to? Why I'm interested in this, and start to do that.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really good. And the fact that you can download the reports as well, presumably it's a process you can go through multiple sort of iterations. So you could either schedule it to do every 6 months or once a year to sort of check on your progress, but you could also use it in terms of actually advocating for digital preservation within your organisation by saying, if we did this element, if we moved everything off, CDRs or whatever, this is the impact it would have. So there's lots of different ways that you can manipulate what's coming out of Diagram to kind of show, to evidence how different processes would impact your digital preservation risk. Yeah,
I mean, I know within the kind of DPC, then they've got a task force looking at EDRMSs and kind of preservation things around there. So that we've done some work with them to kind of model EDRMS in some ways, and one of the organisations involved in that, one of the services involved in that, has started to do some more then specific modelling around their own EDRMS, and again that gives a good tool for saying, we need to either beef that up or start moving records into a proper preservation system rather than just leaving them languishing in the EDRMS once they've kind of reached the end of their business life.
Yeah, excellent. If anybody else has got any questions, then please do let us know. For some reason, my questions have stopped coming through on my screen, so I have to keep going and looking at my other screen instead, just to check that we're not missing anything. So yeah, I think we've talked about the sort of the ways that the data can be used, and the sort of essentially you can kind of use it as a building block for what's there already. So you can do the NDSA, use that to sort of assess where your organisation is, and then use Diagram on top of that to sort of demonstrate next steps, demonstrate what your organisation should be doing next. So I think in terms of, it's a kind of iterative process, isn't it? It's a building block sort of process of using
and I think
different tools at different stages.
There can be that risk of kind of analysis paralysis. You sit and go, oh my God, it's such a big thing. Where do I start? Hopefully this will help give you an idea of where to start, because you can look and see, well, okay, if we do that, oh yeah, that gives us a really big impact. So that's a good place to start. I mean, obviously, yeah, it depends on the costs as well. You can also then weigh up the costs and go, well, actually, that would give us a bigger impact, but would cost us 5 times as much. So actually, we're better off starting with the thing that costs us 1/10 of the amount. You can start to work out the cost effectiveness of different measures as well.
Yeah, and somebody has just asked a very similar question, so I think we've kind of covered it in advance. So thank you, Alexandra. The other point worth making is you can either apply it across the board to all of your digital content, or you could just use it for one proportion of your collection if you were trying to get some progress on, let's say, moving stuff off CDR into a more stable format. If you just wanted to focus on
if you just model everything as saying, actually, for this purpose, I'm going to model everything as 100% on that more risky media, then yeah, that is similar actually to what we did for some of the things around spending review. I will be looking after this for now. We are looking to do more development on it. I'm going to be the sort of product manager in Agile speak. So we are interested to hear from people who are using it, things that they think need improving still. We're aware there are still some accessibility issues. This was a kind of prototype. So the tool which we built it in, which meant DR Shiny that we built it in, meant we could develop this quite quickly, but has a few issues around accessibility, which we know we need to iron out before we can really say it's a properly full launch system. It's still a kind of beta at the moment. So feedback and ideas are all welcome as well.
Excellent, that's really good. I don't think we've got any more questions coming in at the moment, but we'll just hold fire just to see if anything else comes through. So yeah, I mean, as we said, the fact that you can use the tool on just a small proportion of your collection might also help with that kind of analysis paralysis issue of where on earth do I even start? Start small, start with one section of your collection and just see what impact that would have, and then you can obviously take it from there. So yeah, I mean, all the tools and resources that we're looking at this afternoon are kind of, what do I do next? So hopefully that's giving people some ideas on how they can sort of take stuff forward. It doesn't look like we've got any more questions coming through at the moment. So
yeah, I know it's quite a daunting thing to some extent when you first see it. So, do go away. You can't really break anything. So just do try it out, play with it. Obviously, it'll give you more useful answers if you have gathered some of that data, but you can at least understand how some of those things interact just by choosing different options and seeing how changing different bits affects the kind of bottom line.
So everyone, David has now set you a challenge. Try and break diagram. No, we've posted the link to diagram in the chat, so you should be able to see that. We will also, I know we've had a couple of comments saying, can we share presentations and stuff? We will be sharing the whole event via the National Archives YouTube channel in due course. So all of the presentations will be ready to go again. So if you want to watch David's demonstration back, or particular elements of David's demonstration of how do I do this or how do I do that, those will be available to view again. And as David said, he's really happy to answer questions as well. So do get in touch if you have got any queries about it, because we're hoping Archive Services will find it a really, really useful tool and be able to help sort of evidence the need for digital preservation within their organisations. So fantastic.
Like I say, it seemed to help convince the Treasury, so
I can't possibly comment on the ease or lack of ease of that task. That's great. Thank you very much for joining us, David.
No problem. I will be around still as well, so if you come up with more questions during the rest, I'll be here at the end.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great. Okay, so our final speaker this afternoon is Professor Stephanie Decker from the University of Bristol. Stephanie's going to be talking about an AHRC funded project that she's currently participating in to look at preserving and accessing email archives and getting services to think about what researchers might want to think about in terms of presenting email archives for researchers to look at in the future. Have we got Stephanie? Yes, we have. Hooray! I was getting slightly worried then. I was thinking, oh, but no, we have. Excellent. That's really good. So, Stephanie, let me hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. So, thank you very much, Hannah and Joe, for inviting me. I think, as everybody heard, I'm not an archivist. We were really interested as people who like to go to archives, to do research there, to think about how will the future of our work look like? How will we be actually accessing all these digital resources that are currently being preserved? And many of these resources are actually likely to become not just the future, but our present very soon, because obviously things like email were very common in organizations in the 90s. And this material, normally by normal closure periods, should now be available to us. But I titled this presentation Finding Light in Dark Archives, largely because actually these archives remain pretty dark to researchers. So while we have a lot of digital material, there is work going on around preservation. As users of archives, people who are really interested in coming to your organizations, reading the material you have, it's not always very accessible to us. And there are a number of reasons for that. Email archives in particular, there's lots of sensitivity issues. But we were in the fortunate position that we actually have access to some email archives. So myself and colleagues have worked on email archives for historical purposes. We work in business and management schools. We're mostly looking at business organizations. But we actually found that once you start engaging with digital material, it's not quite as easy or as straightforward as you might imagine in terms of discovery, searchability, and many of the skills we hold as researchers are not necessarily always that relevant to researching these new resources. And I guess that puts us in a similar position to archivists who are learning new processes of preservation. So today I would like to talk to you about this project that we have together with a number of organizations, which I'll introduce in a minute. And what we're aiming to do in this project is really to think about how we can search email archives more effectively by connecting content and context. And we're focusing on email archives because they're a specific type of digital archive that maybe poses more issues to both the archivists and the researchers, but are also likely to be amongst the most important historical sources that where they're available to make them available to researchers. So our project is called Historicizing the .com boom bubble and contextualising email archives. We use this picture of the Queen sending her first email there in 1976, but our project doesn't go back that far. It basically goes back to 2000, 2001. We have access to an email archive from a company that had a sort of spectacular rise and a very sudden fall in the .com boom. So it covers largely the late 90s to the early 2000s. So I'm the PI on this project, but I'm working with a number of partners. So Adam Nix from the Montfort University, and very importantly, we have a heritage partner in the National Archives. Dr. Shantilata Kopili is our expert in terms of digital archives and designing solutions. So she's been an enormous asset to the project. We're also working with David Kirsch over at the University of Maryland, who's done for many, many years a lot of work in saving email archives and saving archives of entrepreneurial startups and IT companies, particularly in California. And he's sort of doing on-the-ground archiving from a historian's perspective of these digital archives. And also in the US, because this is a US-UK collaboration, we're working with Eric Rao of the Hagley Museum and Library, which is one of the key places for organizational archives where they're maintained. So they have a range of resources, but again, they're also like many of you building up the more digital side of their service. So this is the project where we were very fortunate to get Arts and Humanities Research Council funding, and we've got another year going. And our interest was really to use the resource we had access to try and understand, well, how will researchers in the future who come to an archive and want to look at digital sources, specifically email, how will they be able to do that? What problems might there be as they're trying to explore a resource? And our interest here is really in this post-analog past. So we're no longer looking at papers, at boxes. And for us as researchers, historical researchers used to archives, perhaps journalists who come and access archives, this is something we're familiar with. But now that traces of the past are left behind in a digital format, our skill set seems to fall a little bit short. And we'll talk a little bit more about users. I think at the moment you might see very different kind of users of digital archives than perhaps the users you've seen for the physical set of resources you hold in your archive. And our thinking here is really around where are we at today in terms of how email collections are being used. So very famously, that would be the Enron email archive, but also the data set we're using, known as the Avocado IT collection. This is actually an email archive that is accessible. It is not accessible through an archive, interestingly enough, even though we very much treat it as an archive, but through something known as the Linguistic Data Consortium. And I think that very much reflects the kind of users at the moment who are able to deal with these digital materials very effectively. They tend to be very social science focused, interest in, say, big data, and they run computational processes. They look at networks, topic modeling, entity recognition, and they're able to do a type of research known as non-consumptive. So they do not actually read these sources, which means it is a little bit easier to give them access in terms of the sensitivity of some of the material that may be in email archives. And our aim is really to think about the tomorrow of digital archives, that when these archives are available in the national archives or any other archive that may hold these resources, where email collections will actually help historians or journalists tell very important stories about how we got here. You know, the reading of the actual resource, how did people make decisions, who was talking about what, when, you know, the classic questions that many of these large-scale data projects, they tell you very interesting things, but they don't tell you the answers to the things that are actually happening that your source may be reporting on. So our aim with the project is really to move a little bit beyond preservation. You may be dismayed hearing that, because clearly there's an awful lot going on in preservation, and it's really important. There will be nothing to research if we don't preserve now. So we're not saying we don't need preservation. But I think David Underdown made, a few years ago, wrote a really interesting blog with Leontine Talboom, saying that access is what we are preserving. And I think this thinking about how does our preservation today allow researchers like us, hopefully, to see some of these sources in the future is kind of the aim of our project, and what we like to sort of raise a bit of awareness around, but also hopefully present you with some solutions. So born digital sources, we totally realize, are shaking up traditional archival processes, and that is a challenge for the archivist and for the researcher coming to the archive. Managing privacy at scale is a real issue. So a lot of these archives remain dark because the reading of other people's emails is a problem, and we accept that. But there is work going on in terms of sensitivity review. So we're sort of jumping a little bit ahead and saying, what would happen if this problem was solved? Would we be able to actually access these resources properly? And Lise Jaillon has made the point that this problem of access will actually require us to collaborate. So both sides of the reading room, the archivist and the researcher, hopefully engaging in a conversation about what do we want to find and how can we find it. And in a very interesting short report from the Wellcome Foundation, it came through that users trying to engage with their digital archives with value and optionality, they still needed some curation from the archivist. But the real problem was that, you know, both the users and the archivists are quite inexperienced in terms of what they want from these resources and how they can get what they want from these resources. Because, you know, there's very little opportunity for researchers to access them due to sensitivity. And as a result, archivists are also not always very clear what users might need. So our project is really trying to focus on this gap between the current efforts to preserve email and the way in which we in the future as researchers might actually read and engage with these resources. As I said, we use emails from a failed.com company known under the pseudonym Avocado IT. So the use is very much through pseudonyms and us also not disclosing people or issues that we're reading. So we've all signed agreements around that. This is preserved and made available through the LDC. The LDC, however, normally facilitates non-consumptive research, so not the traditional historical research, journalistic research you might see in this space. And we're really trying to think about how we can make email archives available for search and study, assuming we can resolve the sensitivity issues. And unfortunately, that's not as straightforward as saying, oh, great, we can now access the emails and reread them, because email have sort of relational and network properties, which we actually think are very valuable, but very often more research is done on the network properties and not really thinking about how might these help us understand the resource we're looking at. So we're really trying to look at this from a user perspective. We start with the assumption email will be an important historical source, quite simply because email are replacing correspondence, memos, often meeting minutes. As we all know, all of this is happening on email, or maybe increasingly on Teams. And the problem with email and all of these other networked forms of information is really that email is both singular and plural. So how do you put email into your preservation system as individual documents or as a whole batch? So is it a communications network, or is it just individual letters? And obviously email are very short. So actually, even more so than traditional correspondence, you need to understand the entire thread, what was going on, the context of a message to really interpret the meaning of a perhaps one-line email. How can we make such email archives more accessible? Lack of context often is a real problem with email. And we found that researching email that the format is so short, and as we all know, it's getting shorter all the time. Without a lot of context of what was happening at the same time, it's extremely hard to interpret anything or make any historical arguments around what we find in these sources. So the lack of context is a real problem for these kind of digital resources going forwards. So we're really trying to find new ways to make archives, digital and particularly email archives, discoverable to non-specialists, by maintaining relational network properties in the format and using AI tools to combine this context with the content. So the sort of how can we get to the content by actually leveraging the context that exists within the format of this resource. So our question here is really, how will users actually engage with Born Digital material once we have these access issues navigated? And that's really a question that's very hard to answer. And we're at the moment trying to build some solutions for how that might look like. And we start with asking, we call them historical, but they might as well be journalistic questions. They're very basic critical analysis questions about who is in those emails, what are their relationships, particularly when we're not just looking at the email inbox of one person that's been preserved, but we're looking at the email inbox of an organization. That might be a government department, that might be a firm. You have more than one custodian of emails. They have relationships, they have private relationships, they have functional structural relationships within the organization. When did something happen? How long did an email thread go on for? How long was there a discussion? And when in time, what else was happening? And the what were the events, or what were sort of related keywords, things that co-occur in the data, and what does this co-occurrence tell us about how something was important in an organization? So that leads us into thinking around requirements for effective machine-assisted discovery, and that's really that we want people to be able to ask a question in normal language, and for a system to understand that question, and to ask the who, when, what question contextually to help you find better results. That might mean by restricting the scope on time, on the type of user, on the type of message, and to also think about whether we can allow connections between contextually relevant repositories. And that's not something we're currently working on, but ideally, this is something that should be enabled. And I think tools such as EPAD, for example, have some facility there to put, let's say, a Wikipedia entry on a person in and use that as a search tool on EPAD. And we started thinking around how would a user actually engage, or how have we engaged, to be fair, when we had a big email archive. And so if we imagine there is a user who asks a specific question, so, you know, as I said, we work in business school, so I'll take a question that might be a question that somebody with an interest in business would ask. Say e-business trends in the early millennium, that's something that our Avocado IT dataset can definitely give us answers to. We ran a content search, so what we get is keyword searches such as e-business or e-commerce. We might also, because the number of hits you get is simply astonishing, you cannot really cope with the search results as a user of these resources, as an archivist. You might have to do a structural selection where you include or exclude on the basis of structural features in the data set, like are emails internal or external, who's been sending them, who are they sent to, is there somebody in the CC or the BCC, what time or day were they sent, and also the folder. Inbox you have no control over, but the sent folder, that shows that there was agency by the custodian in actually sending out an email. So as a user, you think about loads of ways to actually limit the overwhelming amount of data you have in an email archive to try and get to grips with it. And we thought, well, that's great, but really it's not ideal. And if we used AI tools, maybe we could make this a great deal easier. It would make it a great deal easier for any users, but also any archivists who want to understand what is in this resource. So if we go back to e-business trends, say we want to know them between 2001, 2002, and a keyword search, what we get is responses on e-business, responses on trends, and search results 2000, 2001. They're not necessarily linked. You can probably link them, but again, you know, they're just keywords. The contextual search tool that we're currently building with our colleagues at the TNA is testing two models, really. A simple one, the model 1, which offers phrase matching, which means that you can combine these ideas of e-business trends in a specific time period, already gives us much more significant results. They're much more interesting. We read through a lot less material that is not relevant to what we're actually trying to find out. And then model 2, which is computationally more advanced and just simply takes more computing power. This is attention-based content encoding, which essentially allows you to search for e-business trends between 2001 and 2002, but it would also bring up other results such as smart market trends, online market exploration, business collaborations, phrases and ideas that co-occur with discussions of e-business trends in that time period. So it's sort of an intelligent search that allows you to understand the context and also go for all of these related issues that happen at the same time that the same people are mentioning in their conversations. And really, when you're a user of, say, an email resource, this is what you try to kind of get to. This understanding, contextual understanding of what should you be looking at in a resource you may not fully understand. So to summarize what we're currently trying to do, we're really trying to think about different types of users who may come and use digital archives at the moment. And at the moment, what we see is it's very much a heavy computational use. It's often large scale, non-consumptive, i.e. non-reading users who just look at the network properties, for example, or a topic model. And we're kind of highlighting that your perhaps more traditional users of archives actually come to the archive and want to read what's in there. And some of the work that is currently ongoing can actually help us make a search function interested in the content of digital archives more intelligent and more useful to researchers going forward. And it's really around finding the right materials through a more purpose-built discovery tool for digital archives. And we particularly focus on email because email is an interesting problem because of the format of the resource. And email is relevant because obviously social media is pretty similar to email. So the sort of future of communications that we know about will have these similar network properties. So you have to match network property and informational content really in order to understand what this resource has to offer to researchers. So we try to move away from this large scale data set use and rather leverage some of the learning we have from that for people who might really be interested in doing the deep dive into the material you hold. So it's really around people who want to access the content of digital archives. And I think that's something that will become of greater interest to people, particularly as sensitivity review tools are being developed and released in the future. So our aim really was to shift attention a little bit away from preservation towards discovery, not because we have no argument that preservation is not important. We believe it's very important. But we also think as we're preserving these resources, we need to start thinking about how will we discover them and how will researchers like myself and lots of other people ultimately come to your organizations and your archives, and how will they try to engage with the resources that you are currently preserving. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephanie. That was fantastic. Yeah, really interesting project and so many different aspects to think about in terms of implications for sort of storage of materials in future. We've had a couple of questions come through already. Again, if you have got any questions, feel free to post those in the chat. I know this was something you touched on just as you were summing up, but Helen's asked a question about, do you think your research will have applicability to other digital communication methods, such as Teams chats and things like that, because they can often be even further detached from content?
Yeah, for sure. We believe that really the issues you see in email, because they're so networked, you have them with all these other types of, say Twitter or Teams or Slack. You have similar problems. Obviously, in preservation terms, they're different from email. So it's a question of how will organizations ultimately preserve them. But I think they'll pose similar issues, because what you see in, let's say, a Teams feed, they might be discussing something that comes out of a bigger conversation or a meeting that might not be preserved. So you'll have similar problems to email. Whether the same tool will ultimately work for something like Teams or Slack, I don't know. I imagine possibly not, because the background files or formats might be different. But I think in principle, this idea of using relational properties to better search the content of what's there, I think that will apply throughout any digital resource, because I think this using of terms together, the sort of keywords in context, the way they sort of co-occur at the same time, gives you a really powerful tool without actually people having to read and begin to develop that understanding to unpack a resource in a way that we couldn't do before. And it might give us a handle on the fact that we will just have too much data.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that occurred to me during your presentation is you said, you'd been using terms like e-commerce, which obviously sort of, 2002. Yeah. But you think, the thing that occurred to me is how you'd kind of track very rapid changes in terminology. The one that, I thought, if you think emails a year ago, and used the word Zoom, and all of a sudden you see these huge shifts in the systems we're using or the terminology that's being used, whether it's remote working or Zoom or, all of a sudden there's this really interesting question asked of, well, okay, how do we, if we were looking at an institutional archive pre-pandemic and mid-pandemic, there's going to be some really interesting considerations to put in about how we actually search and what terminology we use under in periods of really rapid change and sort of organizational shift.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because I recently read something that some of the AI tools currently don't, the ones that are used by companies to restock shelves, for example, as our shopping patterns rapidly shifted very quickly, they haven't really been able to keep up with it. So I think a lot of these tools, they're very dependent on human input. And I think a lot of these shifts that we're seeing, they are also being researched by, let's say, linguists, social scientists. They're really interested in these shifts in usage. And I think in a way, it probably pushes us to be a little bit more integrated in the way we develop these resources, because the knowledge around these shifts will be there, and it will be something that you can feed into the tool. But ideally, these are also tools that will pick up the terms are used together. But some of this information, a colleague of ours who presented last week was highlighting in the Hillary Clinton emails that there's references to your husband. I mean, somebody needs to make it clear to the tool that Hillary Clinton's husband is an important person and this is Bill Clinton. But once that connection is clear, you can design tools that will pick that up through potentially hundreds of occurrences in an email corpus. So I think it's not about replacing human curation. Archivists will still have a really important role to play. But on the other hand, you can't expect archivists to do all of this manually, given the amount of data that might well be available at some point.
Yeah, thank you. We've also just had a question from Chris. Would the tool you're building be made, would it be available potentially as an open source tool at some point in the future?
Yes, we will be posting this on GitHub. I think at the moment we are trying to test it a little bit. It's not straightforward to test things, and we're also looking at, say, the Enron email database, because it allows us to have more people who can just try it out. But yeah, the idea is that we definitely make the code available, and we'll probably do that in the next couple of months. I can post our website where we're going to be posting updates, and the person to ask around anything related to the tool is Dr. Shanti Kopili. So she's very much the person who's been developing this.
I have included in the chat the link to Stephanie and her team's project. So do go there. There are the sort of contact details and further details of the project. Would that link be updated to include things like the GitHub link in due course?
Yeah, we haven't published it at the moment because we're still looking through, because the interesting thing when, you know, as you train a tool, it's quite interesting that it also picks up, you know, biases, and whatever you train it on first gets reinforced. So we're kind of looking at that a little bit, but we'll definitely make that available, and I'll have another chat. We have another year on the project, and within the next year we will definitely be publishing the code.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. If anyone else has got any last minute questions, feel free to get them in now. Unfortunately, Rosie's had to disappear off to another meeting, but we've still got David and Stephanie here. So we will fill for a moment or so longer, but Joe has joined us again.
Really quickly, as I've got the privilege to ask the question. I wondered, Stephanie, it was really interesting, really interesting talk, and I was interested in what you're saying about non-consumptive research. If there are any archivists listening to this thinking, oh, I'd quite like some non-consumptive research to happen over my collections, what might archivists be able to do to make it easier for researchers to carry out that kind of work, or encourage that kind of work? Write a policy, maybe. I'm not sure what challenges you faced in trying to run this.
So the research we're doing is very much the opposite of non-consumptive research. I think non-consumptive research, if you look at, let's say, the Hathi Trust, for example, it allows you actually to give quite a lot of access to these large-scale big data type computational searches. And I think the University of Manchester Library and Archive, they also have some users who really do these large-scale analytical processes. And that does tend to be much easier because you don't have the privacy and sensitivity issues, because people essentially say, well, we're not interested in the content, we're just interested in the metadata and the relational properties. Obviously, for your traditional archive users who actually want to read what's in the archive, that's not really an option. So at the moment, it seems to be much easier on the digital archives to give access to non-consumptive researchers. And I think the Hathi Trust has got quite a bit of detail what that entails. And I assume within the archives community there are people who might be better on advising how exactly that would look like. As I said, we're very much trying to build a framework for all the other guys who actually want to read what's in the archive.
Yeah, we want it. We want it all. We want to understand all of it and read all of it, and not one or the other. Sure, that makes total sense. Thank you.
Great. Well, we haven't had any further questions in, so I think we'll take this opportunity to thank all three of our speakers this afternoon. So that's Rosie, David and Stephanie. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. Hope you found it a really useful event. As I said, we will be sharing the whole event via the National Archives YouTube channel in the next few days. So all the presentations will be available to view there if you want to watch any of them back or share them with any colleagues. We'll let you know when that's live. I think the event will also be still available on this link here on YouTube for another couple of days before we sort of switch it over. So we will also be sending out an evaluation form. So we'd really appreciate your comments on what went well, what didn't today. But we'd also like your ideas for future Dale sessions. So many of the Dale sessions that we've run in the sort of past year have been in response to suggestions that we've had from participants. So please do keep telling us what you're interested in. If there's projects you've seen, if you want to hear more about what we're doing through Plugged In Powered Up, please tell us, because we want these to be as useful and as responsive as possible. So as I said, we will be sending out the evaluation via a link in the next couple of days. And what we'll do is send that out once we've got the YouTube link ready to go as well, so it's all in the one email together. But thank you very much for joining us. I think, Joe, have you got anything else to add at this point?
I don't think so. Let's shove the. Thank you very much to Stephanie. I'll drop you out of the feed. And don't want anyone to be marooned. Yeah, we'd get pilloried if we didn't say. Do have a follow of us on Twitter if you want to keep up with these sessions in future. And it's for you to do. We promised running, jumping, climbing, explosions. I leave it up to you to say if we promised any of that. No idea. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hopefully not too many explosions.
All right. Over and out, I guess. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.